The Baltimore Ravens and Cleveland Browns face off in a big AFC North battle in Week 8. We talk about the biggest storylines on both sides, key matchups, keys to victory, and so much more coming up next on a crossover Thursday edition of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns.
You are Locked On NFL Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into a crossover Thursday edition of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns. I'm the host of Locked On Ravens, Kevin Allstriker. He is the host of Locked On Browns, Jeff Lloyd. And we are here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today on both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns, making us your first listens each and every single day and a part of your day in general. Free and available for you on all podcasting platforms. So you got video form on YouTube where you can like and subscribe. Also in audio form, you can follow along and subscribe over there as well for 5 days a week of Ravens content and, of course, Browns content as well. Today's Crossover Thursday episode of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns is brought to you and presented by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Jeff, the Ravens at the top of the division here at 5-2. They've won 5 straight. Cleveland has had the quite the opposite season in terms of this kind of spiraling. Deshaun Watson out after tearing his Achilles. It's going to be Jameis Winston for this Browns team. AFC North games are always weird, but I think it's two franchises right now in two different places.
Oh, there's no question about it, Kev. You know, you're sitting here at 1-6. I think last week at 1-5, you thought maybe you had a puncher's chance. You know, if you got that win, they did not. And, you know, Deshaun Watson's season ended last Sunday. You know, for the Browns, it's a different state of affairs right now. You're going to give Jameis Winston a couple starts, see if you can keep, get some life into this team. Maybe you reel off a win or two and maybe you have a chance at relevancy. But I think quickly it's going to turn to DTR. You're going to, see what you have there. It's not a question of whether or not DTR is going to be your future starter. It's more of a question if you think he's going to be your future backup. But look, the Ravens have been hot. We all got to see it Monday night against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And this is a team really starting to pick up some steam. And, probably not this week, but as good as Derrick Henry has been, there was a guy who was a menace in that backfield for them last year. So as much as you have the big, strong tank in Derrick Henry, you now can add one of the fastest running backs in the NFL to this roster very soon.
Yep, and that was one of the biggest storylines for the Ravens here on offense, is that the Ravens did open up Keaton Mitchell's practice window. So you got Derrick Henry, you got Justice Hill, and now Keaton, who, again, we don't know when he's going to be back. It's not going to be this week. I'm pretty sure about that. But, I mean, look, he's a guy that you can do a lot of different things with, and the Ravens ran a walkthrough on Wednesday. So, there's a practice estimation, but you have guys like Zay Flowers not practicing. Nate Wiggins not practicing. Marlon Humphrey not practicing. John Harbaugh's hopeful that a lot of those guys will be able to go on Sunday, but we will see about that. But Keaton would be a huge boost whenever he gets back, because he mentioned the bulldozer and Derrick Henry, who does have some speed to him, and then you add Keaton Mitchell on top of that. But the biggest story for the Ravens offense, Jeff, it has to be Lamar Jackson. He's playing at an MVP pace. Right now at the season end of the day, he'd have my vote for his third MVP of his career. This Ravens offense is dominant. You see a team that, with Lamar playing the best ball of his career coming off of an MVP season, you add Derrick Henry to that backfield, and all of a sudden you have a crazy 1-2 punch on the ground. But what makes this offense so dangerous is that, and I know, Jeff, we've talked about this, you and I, before, where it's Mark Andrews and nobody else in that Ravens offense passing wise. Well, it's a different story this season. You have Lamar spreading the ball around. Rashad Bateman has stepped up. Zay Flowers has stepped up. And so not only do you have the top rushing offense in the league by a pretty wide margin, Baltimore, in terms of net yards per attempt, has the best passing offense in the league. They're going and getting 8.4 yards per attempt. So they're trying to push the ball down the field. They're working the screen game effectively. They're working play action, because, Jeff, we know play action, if you don't have a ground game, it doesn't work. Like, if you hand the ball off and you're averaging 2 yards a carry, the defense will look at you and be like, yeah, right. But this Ravens team is so good at that. You can plop the ball over linebackers. Guys will be able to get open on one-on-one opportunities. And I think it's the versatility and almost like the pick your poison in this Ravens offense that makes them so good and so hard to defend.
That's definitely where you're looking. And I mean, you look at it, it is a big change. Look, Zay Flowers is now the number one wide receiver. Bateman, Monster Night, Monday night. Mark Andrews isn't even the top tight end essentially on this roster anymore. Still good around the red zone, but I mean, Isaiah likely is a guy that can beat you on anywhere, on the field. I think the thing, there was certainly some questions as far as where the Ravens defense was going to be. I think they're progressing. And look, even if they can't attack the quarterback, and get after him like they have in years past, for this team, you get 2 interceptions, from Marlon Humphrey. Baker Mayfield still sees Baltimore black and purple and still, I guess gets the heebie-jeebies, so to speak. So you get that going for him. But I think the defense itself is, they're finding who they are. They're becoming comfortable in their skin. And look, where Baltimore is trending right now, and I know there are some rumors possibly about a certain Cleveland Brown currently maybe reuniting back in Baltimore. That's probably something that would not happen, this week. But Baltimore could also be in a position, we've seen them do it many times before, where, hey, if there's an ingredient or a grocery we happen to be missing, you have a general manager down there who is not afraid in any way whatsoever to go scratch that itch.
No, not at all. And I think when you talk about that, obviously the big name would be Zadarius Smith in Cleveland, and we'll see what happens there. Baltimore, their pass rush, they have guys like Kyle Van Noy, who's had a pretty good start to the year, but the pass rush in general has kind of fallen off since those first couple of weeks. They signed Yannick Ngakoue. I know a lot of people in Baltimore say, oh, was there a wide receiver? Could it be Devontae Adams? He's now in New York. Oh, maybe DeAndre Hopkins. Will he get traded to the Chiefs? So I think, to me, it's more realistic for Baltimore, on Baltimore side of things, for them to go after either a secondary member or a pass rusher. And I think Zadarius, he'd be welcome back. It'd be a 2.5-time reunion, because he almost signed with Baltimore that one offseason before going to Green Bay. But I think for this Ravens defense, the big thing is the secondary. Now, the Ravens did get good news on Marlon Humphrey. The injury, not considered super serious. John Harbaugh said again, he's hopeful that Marlon will be ready for Sunday, but he's been the staple of that secondary this year, because a lot of the other guys, maybe Kyle Hamilton also not in this conversation, but a lot of the other guys have not been up to standard this season. Baltimore ranks 28th in the league in terms of net yards per attempt, which is, it's not I don't think it's a talent issue, Jeff. Like, they have talented players, but you have Zach Orr, who's a first-time defensive coordinator at any level, college, high school, NFL, Pro Bowl, nothing, no play calling experience. Obviously, they had to make some move because Mike McDonald was off to Seattle. But at the end of the day, there's been miscommunications. There have been questionable play calls, and some of that falls on the players, some of that falls on Zach Orr. But you have to be able to establish a better rhythm, especially for this Ravens team, Jeff, that has Super Bowl aspirations. That can't happen. Ed Reed on the Manning Cast on Monday night, when the Ravens gave up 24 points in the fourth quarter, it was 41-10. The game ended 41-31. Ed Reed said that, this team right now, they don't understand the finishing of being a championship team. And Kyle Van Noy on his podcast said he's right. Like, they have to be able to finish. So for this Ravens team, Jeff, defensively, the secondary has to be good in this game. They cannot let Jameis Winston, because again, I think Jameis, we'll talk about this, he has nothing to lose. The Browns have nothing to lose here. Like, Jameis can just chuck that ball up and, there's no pressure. So I think that that's more dangerous than a Deshaun Watson out there. And that's why the Ravens secondary has to be on high alert, even though Jameis Winston is not in the upper echelon of quarterbacks they face this year.
There's no question. And, look, I mean, Ed Reed, look, I understand. We all heard what you're saying. You were playing on a defense that basically had a Hall of Famer everywhere. That is not the norm, Ed Reed. Okay. So give these kids in this defense an opportunity to become their version of themselves. But all that being said, the way this Ravens offense is playing right now, you can't get on the defense. I mean, there's been a lot of teams that have, rallied in a fourth quarter. You still won the game. You didn't fold your tent. And again, it's not a defense that is, laden with Hall of Fame talent everywhere.
Yeah, you got a lot of solid players on. I mean, Roquan Smith has had a struggling year compared to who we have seen Roquan Smith be in the past. I thought he had a better game on Monday night. But then you have guys like Kyle Hamilton, who I think has bounced back on the defensive line. Can guys like Travis Jones, who missed practice, he's been great, but last week he kind of disappeared. So you need to be able to have guys like Nnamdi Madubuike, Dafe Owe, all these other players step up too, because that's what we're seeing on the offensive side of the ball. Like you have Isaiah Likely stepping up. You have Justice Hill stepping up. You have all of these players who might not have the biggest roles, but they're making an impact in that role. Rashad Bateman is the biggest one of those guys who he actually called out the media, Jeff, after Monday night, saying the media says that, me and Lamar don't have a connection, but we do. We showed it. Not going to sit here, keep defending myself. I'm going to let the media talk and do what they do best, create a story. The story is Rashad Bateman's been great this season. On defense, you need to be able to do that same thing, especially because there are star expectations, there are good player expectations, there are role player expectations, and it's tough because this is not like a one-off thing. The Ravens have been blowing these leads for a while, even dating back to the last couple of seasons. They've won 5 straight games. That's the silver lining, right? The offense is so good, like you said, and they're able to at least win. In losses like that Raiders game, that'd be a lot worse. But they're a 5-2 football team right now. They have a lot more time to figure it out. But coming up in the second part of the show, we're going to flip over to the Browns side of things, talk about the biggest storylines on the offensive and defensive sides of the ball over there. So be sure to stay tuned. We have a lot to get to on this crossover Thursday edition of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns. First, this show is brought to you by Z-Biotics. And pre-alcohol probiotic drink by Z-Biotics is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, the alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that is to blame for your rough next day. So pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. So again, the steps: 1, drink the pre-alcohol. For best results, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Step 2, drink responsibly. Pace yourself, hydrate, get a good night's sleep. And step 3, enjoy tomorrow. Wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. Go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On NFL at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL at checkout for 15% off. We are back. Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns. Kevin Oestreicher and Jeff Lloyd still talking with you here, previewing a Week 8 AFC North matchup. Jeff, we're talking about the Ravens. Let's now flip it over to the Browns side of things. Obviously, the Browns on the offensive side of the ball, multiple big announcements made on Wednesday about just how that offense is going to operate. For you, after everything that this Cleveland team has been through, what are you kind of highlighting as the biggest storyline on the offensive side of the ball for the Browns?
Well, I guess, this would have been, these are the best of times in segment 1, and these are the worst of times here now in segment 2 of the Cleveland Browns. The Browns are in a situation now where it's, basically there is nothing you can't do that should be overlooked or not thought of. You are at the worst possible outcome sitting here at 1-6. And it does hurt. Last couple of weeks, you lost by a touchdown in Philly, lost by a touchdown at home to the Cincinnati Bengals. So it's not like you've been getting your doors blown off the last couple of weeks, which probably makes it even a little bit tougher, certainly, because, when they're tough losses, it's a lot easier to go in and go through it and pinpoint a couple of things that certainly could have changed the game. But this has been a team all year long. They've had offensive line issues. The running game has not been their friend. Their quarterback play has been down. Their receivers haven't had the opportunity to do much. Their defensive line has not played on a level that they have played last year. Their secondary has not played on a level that they played last year. I would say the only positional group that is probably, I would say, on par with what they were doing in 2023 is the linebackers. But we know in this modern day and age of football, if you're talking about the linebackers, you're probably a tad bit outdated. It's just not a position that is, as relevant in today's game as it used to be. Now, you go through the injury with Deshaun Watson on Sunday. And, I think the thing that kind of had everybody in a tough spot was, late Saturday, they made the change. We didn't find out till Sunday morning that DTR was going to be quarterback number 2. Up until this point, all season long, Jameis had been the number 2 quarterback. There was some thought process between the offensive staffs, and it worked when they did use him when DTR got in there. They thought they had a couple of run option plays with DTR that could maybe help them. Look, they were trying to win Sunday because I think the odds were, hey, 2-5, maybe we still got a puncher's chance. 1-6 is probably a good shot that this is all said and done and buried. Well, the ultimate happened. That's why DTR ended up your number 2 on Sunday. banged up his finger a little bit, didn't finish the game, which put Jameis Winston in to play the final through a touchdown pass to David Njoku. I think the reason they went to Jameis, there were several times last year where the Browns didn't have the guy start the week at the quarterback position practicing and then ended up starting on Sunday. They didn't want to do that to Jameis. They didn't want to do it to DTR. So look, whoever was going to be the quarterback today at practice at Wednesday was going to be the starter on Sunday. DTR did get through a full practice. That's good. But also, you brought Jameis here for a reason. You obviously thought if there was a need to go out and win some ball games, that's why you brought Jameis Winston here. I thought Jameis should have been starting a couple of weeks ago, personally. There's some things here as well. Look, the offensive line has not been that great, but also I think it's not been as bad as people are making it out. Deshaun Watson got to the point where he was getting pressured so often, he felt there was pressure when maybe necessarily there wasn't. Deshaun, who can make some plays with his legs, was trying to use that certainly as a plan B. Jameis Winston knows damn well his legs are not going to make any plays for him. He is a bigger dude than Deshaun Watson. He can take a beating. If they call 50 pass plays, Jameis Winston is going to try to throw the ball on every single one of those 50 pass plays. He will go out throwing, which gives you certainly a chance to beat anybody. If you're going to throw it up a ton, it gives you the chance. It's the same thing, Kevin. I know you probably have this ingrained in your brain as many times as we've done these shows, is the Browns don't challenge vertically. The amount of times I have said this in the Kevin Stefanski regime, it's now to the point where it's just getting tiresome. They play an arena-style offense, and you're not fooling anybody. You're certainly not fooling your division opponents by doing this. So guess what? You make teams where maybe, and look, the Ravens defense, maybe not as caliber as it's been in some years. Well, you're going to make it a hell of a lot easier when you basically tell them you only have to cover 10 to 20 yards. You're not running the ball the way you have. Maybe that improves this week. Nick has a game under his belt. The offensive line is actually getting to the point now where, look, there were weeks where Friday night they walked off the practice field. We didn't know who the offensive line was going to be on Sunday. We're starting to trend at least to where we know what the starting offensive line is going to be, which helps these guys get some continuity, get a little more comfortable with themselves. And with Nick Chubb, maybe that improves. Now, does that improve enough to go out and, hang 20, which we haven't seen yet, which probably still isn't going to be enough? Is it going to be enough to hang 30 on Baltimore? Probably not. Defensively, Myles Garrett, when he was a kid, had some issues with his feet, had surgery. When he was a teenager. Those things are starting to come back again. So Myles is not 100%. Yeah. And I think you can see it. And also you're 1-6. So there's no reason to put Myles Garrett out there for an insane snap count, 93, 94, 95%. You're 1-6. Right. And there could be the likelihood that maybe Myles doesn't finish this season. Once you find out exactly what he needs as far as taking care of himself, if you're significantly out of it, you might say, hey, let's get the ball rolling on your rehab and go take care of what you got to take care of. But the defensive line has just not played where it is. You've lost Alex Wright, certainly to this point. Zadarius Smith, I wasn't so thrilled with his play last year. His play this year is actually less than it was last year. I think you should start a rookie like Mike Hall. You drafted him in the second round for a reason. He should be starting. Let's get the evaluation process going here. Isaiah McGuire in his second year. He should be starting as well. Let's see where these guys are at so you have a more firm belief of where they're going to be in a pecking order for 2025. Greg Newsome is not covering nearly as well as he did last year. Martin Emerson is not covering nearly as well as he is last year. Teams are starting to go away from Denzel Ward because he is playing that well this year, and you can pick on Greg Newsome, and you can pick on certainly Martin Emerson. The safety play, Juan Thornhill, more missed time this year. It's just not going well at all for this team. And, it's not a question of pointing fingers because I think everybody believes the product collectively has been bad to this point. But if you're the Browns, you got to change. You're going to have Ken Dorsey calling plays. A lot of people want to know what that means. I think it's probably an opportunity to have Kevin Stefanski be more of a hands-on head coach and be involved in a little bit everywhere. You brought Ken Dorsey here for a reason. You going to try anything now. You're 1-6. You're going to throw something against the wall and see if it sticks. So Dorsey's going to get his opportunity. And you have a lot of young wide receivers you're trying to develop. Jerry Jeudy's barely getting any targets. Not only did you trade for him, you extended him. There are so many questions here right now. And look, it's not the best place to be in. And it always is a little bit more difficult to create content. But you have to kind of look at what the next chapter is going to be. So I want to see the Cedric Tillmans of the world. I want to see the Jamari Thrashes of the world. I want to see the younger guys on defense. This is where this team is at now. The one advantage to starting 1-6 is you kind of get an early start on the offseason. And the Browns could have punted on a lot of these guys and monitoring their development this year had they been in contention. Well, that's not the case now. So you can kind of get a firm grasp of maybe what your future is, or at least, who is in the mix to be your future starting this week and to close out the regular season over the next 11 weeks and 10 games.
Yeah, and again, I mean, we can be honest about the product on the field. It hasn't been nearly good enough, and it'd take an all-time turnaround to even have this team
10-0, baby, 10-0.
Yeah, snip the 7 seed. Like, it would have to be crazy. So I'm with you where when you're in that situation, if you're Cleveland, you have to. And look, if the Ravens are going to go get Zadarius Smith, if the Browns just want to throw in Myles Garrett, the Ravens will give like an extra 7th. Like, all right, I'd be willing to make that happen. Myles Garrett for a 7. I would personally let it happen. I would do. But I think, to me, this is a situation where, again, it's a Cleveland team with not a lot to lose at this point. Like, especially if they're going to go the full young route. Like, for the Ravens, there's a lot of pressure, and they've handled it pretty well for the most part this season. But if you're Cleveland, like, yeah, why not go look at the young guys? Why not go figure out who's there? Even for a guy like Nick Chubb, who I know is still working his way back in, is that a guy who you want to give a crazy amount of carries to in a lost season, or would you rather work him back up over the course of this year, get him fully ready for next season, and then have him start 100% full go? There are all these questions, but for this Ravens team versus this Browns team, I mean, I think that obviously on paper, the Ravens should, probably blow out the Browns, but we know, Jeff, in the AFC North, it rarely ever happens in just a very smooth way. There's always something that goes on in these games. So coming up in the final part of the show, we'll talk about what both the Ravens and the Browns have to do in order to win this game. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot to get to on this crossover Thursday edition of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns. First, this show is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats for that play-by-play and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You're started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet for the Ravens and Browns on Sunday. Ravens open up as 9.5-point favorites in this game, road favorites in Cleveland. So if you like that from the Ravens side, if you like the road favorites, or if you like the home underdogs, Browns plus 9.5, you can go and check that out and choose your side over on FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. Welcome back into Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns here on Crossover Thursday. Kevin Ostreicher and Jeff Lloyd still hanging out with you, talking everything about this Week 8 AFC North matchup. Just a reminder, today's Crossover Thursday is presented by Prize Picks. Download the app and use code LOCKEDON to win $50 instantly when you play $5. All right, Jeff, let's dive into some keys to victory here in this final part of the show. I'll start with the Ravens, and then we'll move over to the Browns. For the Ravens, I think, first of all, just get out to an early lead. Yeah, literally. Early lead. Hey, you know what? If you show up, maybe you just win on them. It's like writing your name on the test, right? Like, you just write the name on the test, and then you're good. But, yeah, I think a lead early. Don't let the Browns get momentum. Because, again, I think Jameis Winston is one of those guys where if you give him enough momentum, you're kind of like, oh, who's this guy? It's like the Browns have had success. Especially, I know Joe's a different player. Joe Flacco's a different player than Jameis is. But, it's kind of like the team galvanizing around someone. And Joe was that for them last season. And Jameis is a guy who we know, despite all of his, the funny quotes and craziness that he brings, like, he can be a motivator in some different ways than others. So I would say if you're the Ravens, get out to a lead, just stomp all that down. Don't even let that become a thing. So if you go 14-3, 10-0, does Cleveland have the firepower to come back from that? I would bet against it. So, especially with Amari Cooper now in Buffalo, you mentioned Jerry Jeudy, maybe it's more Cedric Tillman or Jamari Thrasher, whoever it is. If Baltimore can establish that lead, especially using the ground game, I think that would be a very strong start for them. I also think the offensive line playing well. This Browns defense, obviously, you mentioned the Myles Garrett stuff, Zadarius Smith and all those players. The offensive line, first couple of weeks for Baltimore was pretty bad. Honestly, they were key factors in why Baltimore lost their first 2 games, but they have put it together over these last 5 weeks on this 5-game winning streak. They've played really solid football. They lost 3 starters in the offseason, but you have guys like Patrick McCary who stepped in for injury where he's at left guard. Morgan Moses and Kevin Zeitler are gone on the right side. Well, Roger Rosengarten, a rookie, has played really well. Daniel Falele is beginning to find himself at that right guard spot. So if you can stifle that Browns pass rush and you can stifle those guys and make them ineffective I mean, again, that's great for Lamar Jackson in the offense. And then defensively, obviously, no big plays. Although, as you mentioned, Jeff, how Cleveland plays, there's more likelihood for that actually happening for the Ravens, considering the Browns don't push the ball down the field, that effectively they don't even really try. But you can't let these big plays create themselves. You can't let a screen pass go for 20 yards. You can't let a slant go for 60. You have to contain everything. Baltimore likes to not let those big plays happen anyway. But I think, to me, if you can do that, Baltimore can hit on enough big plays themselves. If Cleveland's not hitting on big plays, that's a really big reason why I think they could win the game. But on the other side, Jeff, for Cleveland, what do they have to do to win the game?
Well, there's the one thing we kind of been talking about this entire episode. There is one thing to understand that your season may be over. There is another thing to go out and play as if your season is over. You can't do it. And look, I think there's a good case that this team is going to show up week in and week out, because it's going to be really difficult to go look in Myles Garrett's face, Nick Chubb's face, Joe Bitonio's face. And if you didn't give 100%, these gentlemen are going to speak to you on it. So show up and, fight, because that's what you still have to do. You get paid to do that. So that is obviously the first most of importance is you got to go out there and act like you're 0-0, and it's week one. You have no choice. Second one is you have to find some way to have some balance on offense. You're going to have to get something from the running game. You are going to basically throw the kitchen sink. Look, there's nothing in the Browns playbook right now that if you think it can work, should not be used. This team barely runs jet sweeps. This team doesn't really run very many trick plays. Pierre Strong threw 4 touchdown passes in college. Let him throw a pass. What do you obviously have to lose in a scenario like this? If you think it's something that can fool them and they will not be ready for it, then you go ahead and just do something like that. Defensively, it's always one of the biggest things when you play the Ravens and Lamar Jackson. You want to get a lot of pass rush, but it has to be controlled and contained pass rush, because the last thing you want to do is get after him to the point where now you agitated him a little bit and he says that I'm not going to throw it. I don't need to. And Lamar lives for that. It lives to be rushed and then sneak out. And the next thing you know, you thought you had him in the pocket, and it went from 3rd and 11, and he reeled off 24 yards, and now you're lining it up on 1st down again. You have to play controlled and contained, and that's going to be the most difficult thing for this team. Mike Hall Jr., never really seen him. Isaiah McGuire has not taken very many reps. So guys who are going to start to play a little bit more for the Browns are going to have to understand that. Then there's also going to be the thing of he's starting to change a little bit. And he knows he doesn't have to do that. And he can use his legs to set up and create passing lanes, which is one of the things that's really, really starting to become intriguing with Lamar as he grows and matures, is he's using as athleticism, not to run, to create more downfield. So you have to just play him and give him the respect that he is owed. Back in the day, and Baker said it, and he still gets a little heat for it. It was different back in the day. If you just sat back and made Lamar try to beat you throw for throw, you had the ability to maybe beat him. That's maybe not necessarily the case right now. He's going to beat you either way with his legs, with his arm, and even the Derrick Henry thing. Now, remember, we talked over the summer. The thing I said, look, I have no problem with the move, but it's not like anybody sat here over the years and said, man, if the Ravens could put together a decent running, look, they ran the ball well with Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, certainly Justice Hill, whoever they had, they always ran the ball well. The biggest thing for them going down the stretch is going to be are they using Derrick Henry too much now? Because the thing is, the running game kind of went quiet for them in the offseason. I mean, in the playoffs. So is Derrick going to get too much work that maybe he isn't the same factor in the playoffs? But knowing Baltimore, they'll get a big lead. They'll be able to sit him a little bit, and it'll probably work out for them. But, those are the 3 things. Obviously, nothing to be afraid of on offense. Pull out anything. You need to show up and understand that you still need to fight and battle each and every week. And the other one is just having some new guys play a newer version of Lamar and make sure, you are not setting him up to just absolutely eviscerate you.
Yeah, and for Lamar, I mean, this is the best we've seen of him. But even earlier in his career, we had talked about here in Baltimore about, he has to improve this, that, and the other. And he's matured, like he's grown. Now, the big thing, even early in his career, he would love to, in the pocket as a passer. Like he has been really good at that. He's grown in doing that as well. But we saw kind of glimpses of him taking that lane out and throwing the ball that way. We saw that and we're like, oh, he can do that. And he does it really well. But now we have seen just an improved all across the board Lamar, and coming off an MVP season after what we saw, still a really great player early in his career with a lot with his arm. Like, we saw plenty of stuff throwing outside the numbers. We've heard all that, can't do this, can't do that, can't do this. Well, he did it all early and he's doing it all now too. But it's just, it's to another level. And to say that after an MVP season is incredible. So when you face off against a team like Cleveland, who, as you mentioned, has nothing to lose, they can go out there, play free. Sometimes that's a dangerous thing for a team. Baltimore sometimes falls into those trap games, right? Sometimes that happens. So to me, Jeff, I still think Baltimore wins this game. I think that it's going to be, I don't necessarily know a score, but probably more than 7 points, I would say. How do you think it's going to go?
Look, we're talking about a team that hasn't been able to score 20 points this year. And the Ravens could score 20 points in a quarter. Yeah. Look, I hope for better. I think Jameis Winston improves the product. I honestly don't see how Jameis Winston can make the product any worse, to be completely honest with you. But you told me 30-16. I wouldn't be stunned. It just, plus, when you get to 1-6, and I know fans don't want to hear this. If you get to 1-6, you might as well get to 1-16. What's the point of going, 6-11? What is that doing for anybody at the end of the day? Nobody wants to hear it. They're not going to be happy about it. I don't think they're going to tank. But we're talking about a team that hasn't scored 20 points yet. And now for the rest of the season is going to be quarterback 2 and quarterback 3. Again, I think they can play better, but I'm not sure it's going to be, what it could be. And, as much as I've talked about the offensive line, even if I get the best version of this Cleveland Browns offensive line, I don't think it's going to be a version that is even in comparison of what this offensive line was in 2021 and 22.
Yeah, if I had to do a score, look on FanDuel, that 9.5 for the Ravens, I'm hammering that. I'm probably saying somewhere along like 33-17. 33-16, something like that, where, again, I think that Jameis Winston is the most dangerous option that Cleveland has right now. And I think in Baltimore, people were like, the fans were licking their chops saying, oh, Deshaun Watson, they're going to be able to play Deshaun Watson because of what happened. I think Jameis provides something different.
It's a wild card. It's also a wild card. You don't have much to go on here.
Right. But I still think, with all that being said, I don't think it's going to be nearly enough, especially with how well this Ravens offense is playing, and hopefully could be maybe a stepstone game for the Ravens on defense. But that's all we have for you here today on this edition of both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns. Of course, we'll be back here rounding out the week with more coverage of the Ravens and the Browns on your respective shows. So for Jeff Lloyd, I am Kevin Ostreicher. This has been Crossover Thursday between Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns, and we will see you right back here soon on both Locked On Ravens and Locked On Browns.